Welcome back to the Every Effort podcast. We are so blessed, a little stressed, and making every effort to figure out the rest. We are on YouTube now. We are officially a video podcasting platform. So if you're a regular listener, you are a part of history as we speak.
I feel like the so blessed has never been more applicable. We've spent this last week hooking up the camera, figuring out the sound, so fingers are crossed and prayers have been prayed that this all goes smoothly, but we are super duper excited.
I never in my life planned to be a regular YouTube uploader, but this is where podcasts are moving, and we are part of the future. We love just trying different things out and seeing if it works for us, and bringing the best content that we can. If you don't know about us at Every Effort, we are a couple. We are married, and we talk about a lot of interesting topics in the view of being Christian. So we like to discuss how things fit into the Bible or in the world, how we are supposed to process them, and our goal ultimately is to make other thinkers of the same types of topics.
Yeah, spoiler alert is that we don't always have the answers. A lot of the times these are just continuations of conversation that pique our interest or things that we've talked about with friends, and the goal is that this can start a conversation between you and your friends, your loved ones, your families, and just get us thinking more biblically and about all these things that we have to tackle, from work to relationships to dealing with faith through all these different things that culture is throwing at us, and really just kind of start the conversation and build a bit of a community, because that was something that's been so instrumental for us as young adults, is finding that group of people to realize that we're not so crazy.
Yeah, and I think you'll find that you are not too different from us either. Matt and I say a lot of what you would probably already be thinking, but just haven't been deeply thinking through the process to that end thought. So something I like to say now about the podcast is that we are not a preachy one.
That's a big one. It's hard to find something that's not like, and it's great to have Bible studies and sermons, but it's hard to find something that's conversational, because it feels like there's everyday life and then there's a sermon and Bible study, and there's no like mixing of, hey, I'm every day as I'm going through my life, how does my faith apply? How does figuring out life as a young adult apply? And so we hope that this is just like a more approachable kind of casual conversation that's very real and very authentic, because like I said, we don't have a lot of this figured out either. We're walking alongside all of you.
Yeah, and that is the point. I've just despised what social media has created in terms of what a Christian looks like. I think it's so fake, unrealistic, and Matt and I aren't afraid to share about our weaknesses, and we are okay about saying, like, I don't know. A lot of what content is nowadays is like, these are things that you need to know, but it's not really teaching you how to think, and it's not really teaching you like, what does a real person's life look like, or like a real way of thinking look like. So we're trying to fill that gap.
Yeah, but to get off the soapbox a little bit, I do feel a little offended and attacked that you're talking about my weaknesses on an episode about fashion. Like, is there a connection there? Is there some kind of intervention that's being staged?
Can you tell who came up with this episode title? Yeah, Matt is not really into fashion. I'm into the idea of fashion.
You're a window shopper, fashionista.
Yeah, I love talking about the concepts of fashion, the brands of fashion, what they represent, and as much as I hate to admit it, I personally think it truly is a representation of what a person wants to look like or look like they stand for. What do you think?
I think most of the time it applies, and then every once in a while there's someone that I feel like I know by how they dress and they completely surprise me. But for the most part, like, you can dress in a way that shows business is really important to me, and you can dress in a way that shows that money is really important to me, and you can dress in a way that shows that appearance means nothing to me, right? Like, you can't tell everything about their personality, but how you choose to portray yourself indicates like a lot. There's that first impression aspect. There's a lot of people who will only ever see what you look like. And so that's like a big part of sharing yourself with others.
I've always admired people who are brave enough to present themselves in certain like fashionistic ways, if you will. I don't consider myself brave enough to do that. Like if I see something I really like off the hanger, you know, I'm probably not going to wear like a long sequin dress just to look pretty on like a regular Wednesday. But I do admire people who are willing to, like, knowing they're going to get extra attention, like take the step to put on that jacket or those shoes, you know?
Yeah, and I feel like kind of the background of where all this came from is like the impact that the fashion industry has on all of us, because I used to think it was really kitschy, but I've really come around to that these little subtle things, whether it's an advertisement that's really hinting at appearance being important, or like all of these like very physical elements are what make your night or make your experience. Like those little things, it might not, you know, like write it in stone on your heart, but like they just influence little ways in how we view like, oh, a night out isn't the same unless I have that really nice dress, or unless I have that purse, or like just these little ways that the vision of what a great life can look like is slowly like turned towards consumerism. And that doesn't mean it has to affect you, but I think we would be foolish not to acknowledge that that's like a factor and an influence in culture.
Yeah, and all jokes aside, like this does apply to guys too, right? Guys like their watches and nice socks, and I don't know, is hair gel fashion for you guys?
Oh, I hope not. I think that's going out of the fashion world.
Okay, what's like the latest thing in guys' fashion?
Ooh, I feel like watches are making a big comeback. I feel like when our generation was young, it was all about like having a digital watch and like a what are they called? Like a smart watch. And now it's starting to become cool again to have like collector's items. Okay. But like, I think, and I don't want to get too into like this one detail, but you can enjoy those things and not spend a ton of money and put a lot of weight into it. Like you can, I've been looking at, Jocelyn just found these photos, like Timex watches. Like those are cool to me and they're like $50. You know, it doesn't have to be this like big dedication to enjoy those.
Yeah, but is fashion evil? Is there like an inherent badness to fashion, and like what are we supposed to do as Christians with fashion? Can we represent ourselves with it?
I feel like the argument here isn't around like the clothes themselves, but it's like fashion shows and the way they portray themselves. Like a lot of the time they're very objectifying. They're very like dark, and sometimes like music videos and fashion now there's like a little bit of like evil demonic elements in there. Like there's just little
you could
things.
Say Sam Smithy.
Yeah, that's very true. But I feel like the biggest thing is like there's almost nothing that's redeeming about fashion. Like it's very rare that I look at something and say, wow, that's like a general good for society. It's always like neutral or negative.
Yeah. Fashion it's supposed to represent something about you, right? So when you buy something and choose to wear it, sometimes that is a consideration you have, is like, what am I representing? What do I want to represent? What do I want people to know about me when they see me, right? And it's like, is that a bad thing? Because a part of me feels like, you know, fashion is also like very creative, and God is creative. So he gives people like that sense of designing fashion, right? People who have an eye for fashion. So I think it's an art, but it's kind of tricky when it's art worn by people.
Yeah, I think as an art, it can be really beautiful. And I think as a society, we've moved more towards it being like an empowering thing that can show off the beauty that God gave you. But I feel like what ends up twisting it is that comparison aspect.
Yeah.
Like it's not as bad to where it used to be like, oh, everyone wants to be this 120-pound little stick that's very unrealistic for most body types. But there's still that idea of, oh, I don't have that purse, or my dress isn't as nice as her. Like there's a very blatant trick that companies use, which is to try to get you to want that next best thing, or the thing that's a little bit better that girl has. Like it's never settling or never being content.
That girl or that guy, right?
Or that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, Kanye West is making his comeback every year or so with fashion. So there's definitely a place for guys in this field or industry. But yeah, is fashion like inherently part of the self? I feel like it's like a really hard thing to answer, right? Because like if you had a piece of art hanging on your wall in your living room, it's hard to say like, oh, you're self-centered for having that piece of art. But if you have that piece of art on your body, it's like people can more easily say like, oh, you're just self-centered. You just want people to look at you. But I mean, you technically could say the same about art. You can say someone has this piece of art because they're trying to show off their style or who they want to be or who they want people to think, like what they want people to think that they like, or what money they spent on something, right? So you can argue in very many ways. I think there's a lot of holes with this kind of topic to say that fashion is bad, but I don't think it originally was designed that way. I think there is and can be goodness in it as well. There's just so many ways in which it's abused, I think, that we can only think of it as evil. And I think that actually makes a lot of Christians a little more apprehensive about going out of their box a bit and trying something new, which is not bad.
No, and I think like just about everything in the world, there can be something great out there, and we're imperfect and broken people. And so we're going to break that and find faults in it. Like, I think there are great ways to dress well, to present yourself like humbly and attractively, and like you can be thrifty and put together great outfits that show off who you are. Like, clothing is kind of like a billboard. Like, you can choose how you present yourself. You can choose even down to things like your haircut and your style and the shoes you wear. Like, there are things you can convey about yourself that I really like fitness and I'm athletic and I'm moving, and so that's how I dress. Or, you know, I really value the aesthetic, or like wearing, you know, that flower dress out in the springtime and then putting on the Ugg boots in the wintertime. Like, they're just things that communicate your personality. And I think that's a really cool opportunity. But I think when we say fashion, I think we really mean high fashion. Like, I think of those designer brands, and that's where I think it takes kind of a twist into comparison, and it's never enough, and you need to spend more in order to be that guy or that girl.
Yeah, I think of both high fashion, like with the whole Balenciaga thing. It's a long story, pretty much like a really, really weird campaign that used kids, and like that was not okay. But I think that even regular fashion too is just, because I mean, if you think of the traditional Christian, you don't think of them to be fashionable. You know, like they aren't wearing as many of like the latest trends, and maybe the only people who are those like influencers, but it's not really talked about that. Like, as Christians, we have freedom to dress fashionably and in a way that honors ourselves and isn't trying to impress other people.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's anything bad about it. Like, I think it can be an extension of honoring your body and presenting yourself well to others, like being presentable, being someone that other people want to be around and associate with. Like, I think presenting yourselves as someone who is put together and organized, that has a lot of strength to it, and you can play around, you can enjoy it, but I don't think there's anything Christian where you have to buy the nicer clothes or have to drive for anything else. So I feel like contentment is like one big aspect, but it also doesn't mean that you have to like wear clothes from Kohl's and never like treat yourself to anything. Like, I really think there's a balance there, and it's all about the priority, right? Like, you can enjoy it, but it shouldn't be your number one goal is to earn money so that you can buy the Hermes purse. Yeah.
Or that you're trying to impress somebody else, because that's not going to get you anywhere. You're going to feel empty and sad that it doesn't work the way that you want to, or you're going to feel like you're rat racing all the time trying to impress people. I think that's where fashion gets bad. But I think we should be embracing fashion as Christians. For those who are interested in it and want to make a hobby of it, like, power to you. Like, again, I think that there's a way to do it and there's a way to not do it. So
I totally agree. And I think you might have touched on what I didn't realize is like where all of this comes from, is that I think fashion ads and like the goal of high fashion, like the reason it feels so evil or wrong to us is because it takes like what the meaning of life is to us and turns it into materialism. Like, the meaning of life is to have that nice car, go to those nice places, wear the nicest clothes, and we know that we have a completely different purpose in life. And having those things can be an outcome of living a rich and joyful life that Jesus calls us to, but it doesn't have to be like the center, which every ad makes it feel like.
Yeah. Sorry, It's just Matt is so passionate about this topic. He's sweating. So we're in an enclosed box here. But that being said, is there any news you want to share today?
Yeah. So Jocelyn had a fun idea for kind of the good news of the day segment this week. And what I saw, I really enjoyed. This was a little boy who went and talked to a Duke football player. And it was a little white boy talking to this huge guy who was like an offensive lineman. And he went up and said, "Hey, I want to be like you one day." And the guy had a conversation with him. And then the mom came back, I think a year later, and kind of updated the Duke player on the situation and said, "Hey, when you talked to my son, he said he wanted to play football like you. And the first thing you said to him are, 'How are your grades?'" And he had been struggling and not passing classes. And that year he made honor roll, made straight A's. He made it his priority. And so that mom just sent a message out to that football player and said, "Hey, I just want you to know, you changed this kid's year. You changed this kid's outlook and perspective just because of, you wanted to take and push him towards maturity instead of, talking about football or making it fun."
Wow. And how this applies to fashion, it doesn't, but it's amazing news. That's awesome. Stay in, what did they say? Stay in school, kids.
Yeah, stay in school.
Don't do drugs. That's the message for today as well.
So like we mentioned earlier, if you're listening here on Spotify, very exciting news. This will be our very first full video podcast. So I would love if everyone can go over to our YouTube channel, Every Effort Podcast, and check out the full-length episode. Hopefully it'll be really fun for y'all to be able to see us on video. Sorry that you have to look at my face the whole time, but at least you get to see the nice little setup we're putting together here. And really just want to say thank you all for the support over this past year. It's been really cool building this podcast, adding all these new features. And a great way to support that is to go over to our YouTube channel, subscribe there so that we can really build this into a community of young adult Christians who, like we said earlier, don't have it all figured out, but we're making sense of it and walking alongside each other each step.
Yeah, and even if you're not on Spotify, we are everywhere else pretty much that you can listen to podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review before you head over to YouTube. It costs you about 2 seconds of your life. And yeah, we'd love to have you be some of our first subscribers. Or if you are on YouTube already, dang, you are ahead of the game. So yeah, thanks for listening to the Every Effort Podcast, and we will see you next week.